Hello, welcome. Dr. Sushma Singh this side. Today in Unit 21, Liberalisation and Structural Adjustment Program, we are going to start the lecture with the topic the Official Crisis Management Scheme. In the aftermath of 1991 oil shock that was followed by Kuwait invasion by Iraq, the immediate tasks at hand were to reduce inflation, cut fiscal and trade deficit, increase forex inflows, and bring the economy out of depression, especially industrial recession. The view amongst the economic managers of the Dr. Singh's team was that the high fiscal deficit was leading to an overheating of the economy. It was increasing the aggregate demand in the economy, causing an increase in prices, which was also spilling over the external account and increasing the trade deficit. The increased fiscal deficit meant higher borrowing by government to finance its expenditures. This raised interest rates in the economy and crowded out private investments. A reduction of the fiscal deficit, on the other hand, would have a positive impact. It would bring down the interest rate, reduce the interest burden, have deflationary pressure, which would bring down prices and help close the trade gap. Since one single variable was held responsible for all this, it is but obvious that the target of adjustment policy was the reduction of the fiscal deficit. The three commonly used measures are revenue deficit is equal to revenue expenditures, revenue receipts, fiscal deficit, revenue deficits plus net capital disbursement, and primary deficit equal to fiscal deficit minus disinvestment receipts minus gross interest payments. Prior to the economic reforms, the most common measures of the government's balance was the budget deficit. However, this was found to be too narrow a measure of the government's overspend, and therefore the fiscal deficit was adopted as the standard measure of the government's overspend. There are two related questions that come up here. This single-minded efforts to reduce the fiscal deficit, is it justificable and has it yielded results? The neoliberal economic doctrine described above that was propagated by the World Bank and IMF linked all ills of the economy to the rise in fiscal deficit. However, Rakshit found that the empirical evidence in support of the structural adjustment program was weak. Rate of inflation and the export-import gap had little to do with the level of fiscal deficit, calling into the question the very justificability of the structural adjustment program. Ghosh felt that what was required to stabilize the economy was not further trade liberalization, but agrarian change, since the bulk of the Indian population was dependent on this sector. In the first 2 years of the reform program, the centre introduced severe budgetary cuts, which were directed at reducing subsidies, social sector spending and capital expenditures. As a consequence of this, revenue deficit as well as the fiscal deficit declined briefly, but by the mid-90s, these returned to the pre-reform level. In fact, the revenue deficit persistently exceeded the 1990 to 91 figure by 1998 and 99. The share of revenue deficit in the fiscal deficit grew from below 50% to 78%. This means that excess government spending was not for asset creation but the consumption purposes. It seems that the fiscal deficit itself has been declining. That should be reason to cheer. However, a close look at the data tells another story. The center's deficit are only a part of the overall deficit of the center and states combined. Data clearly shows that the revenue deficit has increased persistently and fiscal deficit has hovered around the pre-liberalization figure. So, despite the fairly robust growth of the economy and the wide-ranging fiscal changes that have been undertaken, we continue to have a government that invests too little and consumes too much. Further, the center very quietly is passing on its fiscal responsibilities to the states, so while the center seems to be improving its fiscal performance, it is the states which have to suffer the fiscal burden of reform. The major problem large debts and deficits pose for any government is the burden of servicing the debt. In fact, the central government has an interest liability amounting to more than 4.5% as a proportion of GDP. This is a large drain on the government's limited revenues and squeezes expenditures on other hands. Here we want to close this lecture. Thanks for listening.